Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It's Thursday, September 12th, 2019. I'm Michael Brooks. On a Michael Thursday, this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, Daniel Bessner, historian from the University of Washington, on the fog of intervention, Samantha Power, and her dangerous, reckless, interventionist foreign policy. If it's not Bernie, she is angling pretty hard to be Secretary of State if there's another Democratic administration. We'll get into the details and the flaws in the power worldview. The Supreme Court says that Trump's administration can begin denying basic rights to migrants, denying basic asylum to migrants while a legal fight continues. In another edition of Judicial Nominees Have Consequences, Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu says, vote for me or the Arabs will annihilate you. Even as mass suppression continues in Kashmir and in West Papua in Indonesia, the maker of OxyContin reportedly pays billions of dollars to settle an opioid lawsuit. Israeli elections, as I said, are underway. Will Netanyahu return to power, or will Jeffrey Epstein associate Ehud Barak lead a centrist coalition? Meet Charlie Kupperman. He's Trump's new acting national security advisor. And, of course, he advised a group that promoted anti-Muslim conspiracy theories. Remember the despicable, disgusting Trump administration decision to deny people fleeing from the Bahamas getting on boats to the United States? Well, a 12-year-old Bahamian girl separated from her parents ends up in a Miami home for migrant kids. ICE is building a state-of-the-art warfare training facility that will include hyper-realistic simulations of homes in Chicago and Arizona. The reason why we know this is because someone from ICE accidentally released it, proving once again that ICE really is the effing moron fascist organization. New revelations in Lava Jato. Not only did Judge Sergio Moro, clown fascist Bolsonaro's justice minister who corruptly put President da Silva in jail and made him a political prisoner, he didn't only illegally leak conversations, he edited them to make Lula look bad. North Carolina Republicans vote to override a budget veto in a half-empty assembly during a 9/11 remembrance. Maybe not a moment for nation-state rituals, huh, guys? Education Department threatens to suspend employees who provide the Post with budget data. And girls appeared to be 11 and 12, seen with Jeffrey Epstein getting off his plane in 2018, authorities say. All that and much, much more on today's Majority Report. But first, let's just start. Oh, of course, also September 11th was yesterday. That's also the anniversary of the CIA-backed 1973 coup, which deposed Salvador Allende and brought Augusto Pinochet to power and resulted in the loss of, tens of thousands of people in Chile, but also if you look at the Condor years, which was the coordinated efforts of Latin American fascist governments, Argentina, Chile, and so on, with the strong backing of the CIA and Henry Kissinger, You're talking about a global mass killing spree in the late 70s through the early 80s. And then, of course, going to the 80s where the Reagan administration's dirty wars and support of genocide in places like Guatemala. We'll get to maybe some of that in the fun half. It's going to be a very short show today because we have to be here tonight at around, I think our coverage is probably starting around 7:45 or so. Hello. And we're...
Good morning, Patriots.
I still cannot get over the fact that
Good morning, Rebels.
That Dennis Prager is saying that to Dave Rubin's face. That the whole thing that drop comes from is Dennis Prager basically looking at Dave Rubin and saying, "Oh, thank you, you stupid idiot, for being a gay guy that repeats all of our far right talking points. And by the way, we're not homophobic. Hello." Dennis Prager did accomplish one thing in his life, and that was that video. That was very funny. Yeah, we're doing live coverage of the debate tonight.
We're working a double.
So we'll probably be out of here at about 1:45 today, but we will get to some stuff in the fun half. But we want to start with a little bit of fun. Here's Donald Trump. This is, of course, a country where most people, all Republicans, most Democrats say that we could certainly not get rid of, pollutants in the atmosphere. We can't give everybody single-payer health care. We can't get rid of guns and all sorts of predator companies, but we can do this. The vapes are coming for you. And they're also coming for somebody's kid. It's maybe an interesting tip-off
It's a bit unclear whose.
Yeah, I don't know what kid we're talking about here, but it's a concern about children.
Your announcement today, are you concerned that the companies that were making these products will be treated unfairly by taking these products off the market?
Well, they've become very rich companies very fast, and the whole thing with vaping been very profitable. And I want companies. Look, you know that I fight for our companies very hard. That's why I'm fighting with China. That's why I'm fighting with other countries. If you look at European Union, and if you look at Japan, and if you look at so many others, including South Korea and many others, we're constantly dealing with them to make it good for our companies, because I view it as jobs. I view it as income for our country and jobs. Vaping has become a very big business, as I understand it, like a giant business in a very short period of time. But we can't allow people to get sick, and we can't have our youth be so affected. And I'm hearing it, and that's how the First Lady got involved. And she's got a son together that is a beautiful young man, and she feels very, very strongly about it. She's seen it.
Maybe we'll take that again.
Yeah, let's take that again. She has a kid. She's Justin Trudeau impregnated her at the NAFTA renegotiations, and she's very concerned.
I'm hearing it, and that's how the First Lady got involved. And she's got a son together that is a beautiful young man, and she feels very, very strongly about it. She's seen it. We're both reading.
It'd be really fun if they're talking about Don Jr.
Would it be really funny? And you could just picture all of the traumatic memories going through Donald Trump's, and then I begged her to have an abortion months before the baby was born. And then I took her out to dinner at CERT, and I begged again. And then I even let her try Mamafuka, where they don't even have steak. And I begged her again. Still wouldn't abort the son. We got
involved. And she's got a son together that is a beautiful young man, and she feels very, very strongly about it. She's seen it. We're both reading it. A lot of people are reading it. But people are dying with vaping. So we're looking at it very closely. And, if nothing else, this is a conference that's going to let people know about it, because people are going to watch what we're saying.
Right.
And parents are going to be a lot tougher with respect to their children. A lot of people think vaping is wonderful. It's great. It's really not wonderful. That's one thing I think we can say definitely, Commissioner. It's not a wonderful thing. It's got big problems. We have to find out the extent of the problem. It's so new. But we're going to find out. And I hope that parents that, they have children, and the children are a certain age, I hope they're going to be able to make wise decisions, maybe based on what we're saying today.
It is true. They haven't really been researched, and I think these companies make a lot of claims that are definitely not validated. But
Wow.
That's one of those ones where it's like he's not exactly wrong. I mean,
No.
if we wanted to be like some twerps at the Washington Post and fact check it, I mean, Melania does have a kid or
Together.
something together. Yeah, that all
She's got
that
a kid
clears
together
out.
with me.
I wouldn't say that vaping is wonderful or a tremendous thing to do, and it hasn't been researched. Fair enough.
As if the entire socialist left were not already united against Trump, now he's coming for our nicotine. No. Not gonna fly.
She's got a kid. Kid's a little weird. Not sure what.
A lot of people say it's wonderful. It's not
wonderful. A lot of people say it's wonderful.
Grover Norquist won't shut up about it.
Grover Norquist won't keep his goddamn mouth shut. In this golden age of television and podcasts, we all know the value of a truly compelling narrative. Cue Hunt a Killer, the murder mystery box that immerses you in an ongoing experience. With every delivery or episode, you'll dive deeper into what it's like to be a detective, sifting through piles of documents, evidence, and case files until you crack the case. And instead of staring at a screen, you can build an investigation board with friends or an online community, helping each other through every challenge. Plus, part of the proceeds for every box goes to the Cold Case Foundation to help fund cold case investigations. Now, as everybody knows, Sam has commandeered the Hunt a Killer box so he can play it with his kids. He raves about it. He talks about how it's unparalleled family time, how it's a really fun thing to do, and it's a break from the screens while keeping everybody excited and engaged. Right now, just for our listeners, you can go to huntakiller.com/majority for 20% off of your first box. They only accept 200 members per day, so hurry up to take advantage of this offer. That's huntakiller.com/majority for 20% off of your first box. huntakiller.com/majority. We'll be right back with Daniel Bessner. To the Majority Report, Michael Brooks here. Joining us now is Daniel Bessner. He's the Pyle Professor of American Foreign Policy at the Scoop Jackson School at the University of Washington. I could never get over the irony of that appointment, although it is well-deserved, of course. And he's the author of this new piece in the New Republic, The Fog of Intervention, which focuses on the highly troubling record and intellectual framework of Samantha Power, who... Daniel, would you say, with the exception of Sanders, who's sort of the only one attempting to cultivate a bit of a new foreign policy, a significant new foreign policy framework, that this is somebody that could actually be, that will certainly be lobbying to be Secretary of State in a Joe Biden administration, as an example?
Oh, absolutely. I would say there's a very good shot she would be Secretary of State in the Biden administration, or perhaps even a Warren administration. And if not Secretary of State, then definitely one of the most important undersecretaries of state, or at the Department of Defense, too. An undersecretary at the Department of Defense I could see as well.
So who is Samantha Power, and what is her trajectory?
Sure. So just very brief, Samantha Power is someone who immigrated from Ireland to the United States with her mother, who was a doctor when she was about 9 in the late 1970s. She went to Yale as an undergraduate. After graduating from Yale, she became a war reporter in the Bosnia conflict in the mid-1990s. Left that conflict, I believe, in 95 to start a position, not a position, but to become a student at Harvard Law School. At Harvard, really dedicated herself to examining the question of when and if the United States should intervene abroad militarily to end human rights abuses. Essentially came up with the conclusion that military intervention should always be on the table. This was over the course of the late 1990s. And then she began writing a book that eventually became 2002's A Problem from Hell, America in the Age of Genocide, in which she argued that the United States over the course of the 20th century failed a number of foreign peoples abroad, the Armenians, the Cambodians, the Kurds, and the Rwandans in particular, but other groups as well, of course, the Jews during the Holocaust, even though the United States eventually, liberated some camps in Western Germany. But she wrote this book, A Problem from Hell. It won the 2002 Pulitzer Award, Pulitzer Prize for General Nonfiction, was used in the cudgel for the debate to invade Iraq, even though Power herself was against the invasion. She eventually meets up with Barack Obama around 2005, takes a leave from Harvard to work for him for a year, and after Obama wins the Democratic presidential primary campaign, she becomes one of his foreign policy advisors. When he wins the presidency, she he appoints her to a position, to two positions on the National Security Council, basically head of human rights. And then in his second term, Obama's second term, 12 to 16, she replaces Susan Rice as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. And just to conclude, she was very much in favor of the United States intervening in Libya. And after that, she was in favor of the United States doing more to intervene in Syria. Particularly, she just said today on NPR, in fact, and she says essentially in her book that Obama shouldn't have gone to Congress for approval and should have just intervened essentially unilaterally in Syria. And now she's just published a memoir called The Education of an Idealist, and that is what my review was on.
So what is the significance of Bosnia in all of this? Let's go back to the 1990s and juxtapose it between, we have a post-Cold, the Soviet Union has collapsed. There's the need inside, the military industrial complex and the intellectual complex, the defense intellectuals, which you're a historian of, to basically justify still having a global U.S. military presence, still, eating up huge amount of the discretionary budget with military spending, and not really sort of reforming the intelligence apparatus. Then there's this sort of triumphalism, obviously. And then there's an understanding that from Bosnia that seems to have kind of filtered and really culminated in Iraq, although it is interesting that she opposed the invasion. I mean, obviously that's to her credit, but it's in her book, and I think it's in a lot of people's perceptions of Bosnia that, one, that yes, that early on there was a non-intervention, so there was mass slaughter and genocide, but then that also the later Clinton, the NATO bombing of Serbia was basically, easy, right? There was no real cost to it. It achieved a political objective and so on. Not much on civilian casualties in Serbia, not much on sort of problematizing what NATO's role was it relative to how it related to Russia in a post-Cold War environment. What was actually happening in Bosnia, and how did the presuppositions and conclusions coming out of Bosnia filter into her work, and then the sort of catastrophes that would come after, especially even during Bush, but also in this so-called, liberal hawk or liberal interventionist tradition that she exemplifies?
Sure. So I think to really understand it, you need to go back a little bit earlier. So let's just say this is actually what I wrote my first book on, titled Democracy in Exile. If you go back to the 40s, the people who create things like the National Security Council and the Department of Defense and the CIA, their major argument was essentially that once the Soviet Union is defeated, you could basically get rid of all of these institutions and American life could return to normalcy because there wasn't an existential threat. Now, of course, when the Soviet Union collapses over the course of 1989 to 1991, this isn't actually what happens for a variety of institutional reasons and intellectual reasons, mainly that people begin to believe that the United States has the right and duty to govern the world. And this, of course, is a deep strand of American history, going back to the 1630 speech, A City on a Hill, but really beginning in during World War I with Wilsonianism. The idea that the United States will only be safe in the world if every place in the world is a democracy. So you get this idea after the collapse of the Soviet Union that the United States military is essentially able to act as a non-political force in the world. During the Cold War, it wasn't really possible for Samantha Power in the 1960s or 1970s to argue that the U.S. military was an apolitical force because it was clearly fighting anti-communism, right? But with the rise of the post-Cold War rhetoric of the end of history, the idea that all political development had come to an end, you get this argument that the military could be an apolitical force and it could actually act not on behalf of the United States, but on behalf of humanity. And so these are the arguments that are beginning to percolate in the early to mid-1990s. Now, what happens in the mid-1990s are two terrible humanitarian disasters. One, you have Rwanda in 94, the genocide that the United States doesn't intervene to stop. And then you have basically the siege of Sarajevo in the mid-1990s during the Bosnian Civil War as Yugoslavia has broken down. So Samantha Power is basically in the former Yugoslavia in the early and mid, and really more in the mid-1990s, and she witnesses what happens when there's essentially a humanitarian crisis and the United States doesn't intervene to stop it. So this becomes a really crucial moment in her life because for her, the failure of the United States to stop the siege.
Oh, sorry, folks. Call Daniel right back. Just give me a touch of just a little bit.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. It just dropped. All right, let's just come right back. Do you remember where you were?
Okay, so absolutely. So basically, Power.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
So no worries. So basically, Power is in Bosnia in the mid-1990s, and she basically, her personal experience leads her to conclude that the United States really needs to intervene in the world. Otherwise, humanitarian disasters are going to repeat. And not only that, the United States has the right and duty because at the end of the Cold War, it can act as an apolitical force. And so what eventually happens is Clinton does end the siege of Sarajevo in the summer of 1995. I believe it is July or August. I don't exactly have the date. And this sets the stage going for a bunch of liberal humanitarian interventionist arguments that become very powerful over the course of the mid to late 1990s. Of course, Clinton intervenes in Kosovo with airstrikes, and in the lead up to the invasion of Iraq, not the major reason, but one of the reasons that people were arguing in favor of intervening was that Saddam Hussein's gassing of the Kurds in the 80s, the chemical attacks against the Kurds, provided a casus belli, a legitimate reason to go to war in order to protect humanitarian intervention, in order to basically defend human rights. It's through humanitarian intervention. And this becomes Power's essentially major argument in A Problem from Hell. And the book, particularly when it won the Pulitzer in the 6 months after 9/11, we just had the anniversary. So in the 6 months after 9/11, she becomes a very influential figure in human rights discourse throughout the United States, but also throughout the world as well.
So how does the tension work? I remember reading that book in college, and there's no room in that book certainly for any economic questions, for any broader kind of equity and social rights questions. There's not much focus on the U.S. role, as an example, and say the other 9/11 and supporting a coup that removes Allende on behalf of, U.S. Business interests essentially in their region. So that isn't in the book, but attention that is in the book is that on one hand, as you're saying, it's this sort of blind faith in American power to right a particular type of wrong in the world, not the wrong of sweatshops or maldistribution, but the specific, obviously very serious atrocities of genocide and mass killing. But at the same time, she also has to, document as an example the fact that the Clinton administration did sit on its hands during Rwanda. Not only did they sit on their hands, they actually had to actively try to downplay what was happening in Rwanda because they, fearing basically because of what had happened in Somalia, they saw it as essentially a PR problem, not a human problem. Obviously, she had to acknowledge Kissinger, and his, and leading to an ironic and funny photo we'll get to later. But how did she square that? I didn't really get how she did in the book, but how did that sort of split come of, as a historian of U.S. foreign policy, you have to see all of the areas where the United States has either, fought to block UN conventions on genocide, which she focuses on that book, or sat on its hands, or maybe even she kind of acknowledges to some extent even supported genocidal regimes, versus the United States can become the bombardier wing of Amnesty International.
Exactly. The biggest critiques of the book from historians is that there's no mention of Vietnam, and there's no mention of the United States' participation in the Indonesian genocide, let alone mentions of things like the overthrowing of Mossadegh in Iran, or the overthrowing of Arbenz in Guatemala in the 50s, and Allende. None of that is mentioned at all in the book. So there's some obvious blind spots. What I try to do as a historian is try to historicize why Power was able to allow herself these blind spots. And to me, it's really this end of history moment plus added with this sort of Holocaust memory that becomes really popular in the 80s and the 90s. And there's a crucial moment in Power's memoir, which I haven't really seen talked about in many of the reviews. I talk about a little of mine. But basically, as a college student, she visits Dachau, which is one of the first concentration camp. It's outside Munich, and the American forces liberated Dachau. And she says, look, this really began demonstrating to her the importance of American military power in the world. And if the United States didn't intervene in World War II, then all the Jews of Europe would have died. Of course, there's no mention of the fact that, for example, it was the Red Army that liberated Auschwitz, right? So all told, I think Power's history, I think many histories of liberal interventionists, by this I mean the histories that they choose to remember, are incredibly selective. And this is, to me, the major problem with their thought, is that they want the good of American military intervention. And I think I'll go on record as saying that if you could stop genocide, theoretically, that would be a good thing. But the problem is, in actual history, that it never just results in a quick stop of a genocide. It always destabilizes these societies. And beyond that, there's the pernicious effects of having this enormous military, beyond, the fact that the United States is literally able to destroy many areas of the world in 10 minutes, and someone like Donald Trump could do that. There's the fact that we spend so much of our money on weapons instead of welfare. There's the fact that we have a domestic political culture that is organized around military ideas and military metaphors. So the problem that people like Power are never able to confront is that it is not historically possible in actual history to get the quote-unquote good of military intervention without the bad. And I think you see this primarily in the fact that they always pose military intervention as a philosophical problem, right? Do you save dying babies? The answer, of course, is yes. But the problem is, when you're talking about foreign policy decision-making, when you're talking about what has actually happened in 70 years of the United States running the world, it's never just about saving innocent babies. It winds up that military intervention kills more babies in the medium and long run than perhaps not doing anything at all. But the problem is that after the end of the Cold War, and then I'll finish up, is at the end of the Cold War, people really believed that the United States had won history and was able to do whatever it wanted in the world. And you see this with Madeleine Albright calling the nation the indispensable nation, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. And even in the Albright case, though, what's extraordinary, those of us who kind of came up on the left will remember that even as that discourse is happening, Madeleine Albright is confronted on a mainstream American news program. I don't recall exactly which one, and basically saying, look, the sanctions regime that you're overseeing in Iraq is people are dying as a result of lack of resources. And she said, she didn't say, it was a sort of typical evasion, which was to sort of pin all of it on Saddam Hussein. Obviously, part of it was the Hussein regime, but the reality was there was very aggressive sanctions that were blocking medicines and other vital, economic activity in Iraq. She said it's a price worth paying, and nobody seemed to kind of say, "Wait a second, how do those two things fit here?"
Or who allowed Madeleine Albright or any U.S. policymaker to be the moral arbiter of the world? Right. It's a prerogative and a privilege of empire, because another reason that people like Samantha Power and Madeleine Albright want to intervene abroad is because the other countries aren't going to intervene back. So all of this is premised on a prerogative of unquestioned American empire. And they basically, what happened in the 90s is that they equated the empire with literally the moral good. And I'm using philosophical terms because that is what they literally thought, that the United States and morality were literally identical. And you see very quickly with the problems that this could lead to.
Right. And so then let's contrast, and maybe even as a point of reference, the trajectories of Peter Beinart, who used to edit the very hard neocon, neoliberal line in the New Republic, where he quite happily promoted the invasion of Iraq and various aggressive policies from Israel and the United States. And then as a journalist and as an analyst has sort of significantly modified his foreign policy view because of actual realities on the ground. And then Samantha Power, who actually ends up in power, in a position to, quote, do something, in her words, and basically helps oversee some of the largest foreign policy disasters that the Obama administration was involved in. And also in the same context of an administration which is, radically amping up a global drone regime. What does that tell you, that even that contrast between maybe an outsider and insider, but also the fact that apparently there's been no lessons here. There's been no evolution of thinking.
Right, and that's why my first zinger in the review is for a book titled The Education of an Idealist. Power appears to not have learned very much. And I think you see it in the fact that, for example, throughout the book, Power doesn't mention Israeli occupation of the West Bank or the Israeli siege of Gaza, the saga of Gaza once. She doesn't mention... Right. She doesn't mention Saudi Arabia or the various human rights abuses it regularly commits once. She doesn't mention drone strikes once. Whereas Beinart, for example, and to his great credit, has actually spent the time to learn from history, and I think has immersed himself more seriously in American history, and perhaps more importantly, has done things like gone to the West Bank and actually see what Israeli occupation is like on the ground, and has admirably changed his mind as a result of that. And this is, so the question is, what's the difference? And I think a big difference between them is the fact that Power, I couldn't really get, it was cut from my review, but she really believes in meritocracy. And there's a lot of talk, and it hasn't really been getting much discussion in the reviews because everyone's focusing on the humanitarian stuff. But basically, there's a lot of lean-in feminism throughout The Education of an Idealist. There's one chapter titled Lean On, where she talks about how she needs to lean on like Kat Sunstein, her husband, the famous nudger-in-chief, and things like that. And so she really accepts the premises of neoliberal capitalist empire and globalization fundamentally. And I think to reject those premises would be to reject the project to which she's dedicated her life. And I mean, I'm a historian. I don't like to get psychological, but I just imagine that would be difficult for most people to do. But it's especially difficult for Power because, it's not, in some real sense, she has blood on her hands by basically promoting Libyan intervention and by basically saying that Obama should have ignored Congress and intervened more heavily in Syria. So I think someone like Power is unable to basically turn against the premises by which she's lived her life in a way that Beinart, who's not a policymaker, is much more able to do. But the question to me that's interesting is to see what the Democratic foreign policy establishment is going to take from this going forward. And if Power is going to be someone who's a viable candidate for a senior level position in a Warren administration, or maybe even in a Sanders administration, because you and I have talked about who's going to staff these agencies. So it'll be interesting to see going forward what the Democratic foreign policy establishment does with Samantha Power in her career.
Let's spell out Libya and Syria a little bit more. I want to quote specifically, though, from your piece. Power's recollection of the Syria debate highlights her meritocratic skepticism of democratic politics. She writes that she, quote, regretted that our administration had not ascertained whether or not we had the votes before the president announced he was going to Congress. Had he known he would fail, she did not believe he would have chosen the path he did.
Right. So the question there, or the issue that's really important there, is that essentially Power is saying that she doesn't think there should be real public debates about American foreign policy choices. And this has been a theme of the American foreign policy establishment since it was created in its modern instantiation after World War II. And as we've talked about before on the Michael Brooks Show, great show, everyone should listen, is that the institutions of American foreign policy, like the NSC, like the DOD, like the CIA, were specifically created. One of the many reasons they were created, but an important reason, was to ensure that ordinary Americans weren't actually able to influence American foreign policy and basically the policies of the empire. And so, though no one would say today, Samantha Power, I'm sure would never say that she's anti-democratic. I'm sure she's a member of the hashtag of resistance, for that matter. You could see through quotes like that she very much is skeptical of ordinary Americans' ability to make decisions about what the United States should do in the world. Now, of course, the bitter irony is that people like Power are sending other people's children off to war to get traumatized, to get injured, and in some instances to even get killed, while, of course, she and her family and her friends and her social group suffer absolutely no consequences.
They lean on each other.
For someone who's concerned, they lean on each other. So for someone who's concerned about morality, it's a pretty glaring lacuna, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And in addition to that, you also say, meanwhile, I'm quoting you again, meanwhile, Power completely ignores the human rights violations that took place in her own country under Obama's watch. Like many liberal internationalists, she's far more vexed about suffering abroad. Nowhere does she address police violence against African Americans, mass surveillance, refugee detention, or mass incarceration. Nor does she give much thought to the colonial violence that defines American history. And you say in the Education of an Idealist, she recalls inviting a Serbian official to meet with her in the so-called Indian Room, where she lectured him on the importance of apprehending war criminal Ratko Mladic. Somehow, Power overlooks the irony of championing justice in a room named for repeatedly breaking treaties that the U.S. government made with the native population against which it committed genocide. I just wanted to quote that in full because I think that really, and we'll, as you respond to that, we now have the photo of Powers and Kissinger, who, I mean, if we can acknowledge that in reality, unwittingly, but in reality, she certainly has blood on her hands from, Libya as an example. Henry Kissinger, I think, is quite comfortable with the blood on his entire body, soaking himself from his entire career.
Yeah, I mean, he's someone who's truly bathed in blood. And I think the reason that I highlighted that is not to do a gotcha on Power, right? But it's just to say, if you're writing a 500-plus page memoir, it might even be 600 pages, I don't know. It seems like you would at least want to address the fact that, like you said before, drone strikes increased under Obama, or the fact of, warrantless surveillance or targeted assassinations or mass incarceration of an enormous number of the American poor and African Americans in particular. And it just seems like such a glaring instance. And this is what's important about that, is that the world that she claims that she wants to build, which is a world of human rights, which we all, I think, should want to build, will never be built if you don't take account of your own hypocrisies and your own blind spots. And particularly the thing that was just so glaring to me is, because she's a foreign policy person, is how do you not mention Saudi Arabia and Israel?
Right.
How do you not mention Obama in 2015 ramping up the Saudi war in Yemen?
Right.
I mean, this is such a glaring gap. It really does undermine the entire project, because then you start asking yourself whether she's a morally or intellectually serious person, and I think this is why I think the New Yorker review got at it well. It's like, I think this is an audition for Secretary of State, and this is why the New York Times gave Tom Friedman the review of this book as opposed to someone who was going to evaluate it more seriously.
Right.
And I think and shows a problem with the whole establishment.
Do you think there's a really disturbing incident that I think took place in 2015, I want to say, maybe even 2016, towards the end of the Obama administration.
Yeah, I think April 2016.
April 2016, Samantha Power, and this is just really depressing, horrible incident, which obviously, I mean, I've seen footage, actually, I forget that, I don't recall the name, but there's a documentary sort of tracking Power. She obviously wasn't happy about this event, so that's not the point. But this event in Cameroon, which is such a kind of perfect micro case study of this imperialist, interventionist kind of moral self-importance and its actual consequences on the grounds. Can you tell us what happened?
Sure. So basically, everyone remembers Boko Haram. It had moved out of Nigeria and into several countries like Cameroon. So Power was going to one of the big things that she highlights in her book is that she would go around the world and really try to meet with people on the ground and see what they were experiencing. So in one of these instances, she goes with her 12-car convoy or whatever it is to Cameroon to visit a refugee camp of people who had fled Boko Haram, and on the way to the camp, her convoy, not the car she was in, but one of the armored cars, basically crushed the head of a young boy. I believe he was 7, named Toussaint. And basically he killed him. And there was like a horrible outcry, obviously, because this boy wouldn't have perished if Power hadn't been there. And she, I guess to her credit, if that's what you want to say, she admits as much in the book. But the thing is, and that's what's particularly disturbing to me, is that she doesn't take the opportunity to reflect on what this almost too perfect metaphor for what humanitarian intervention winds up doing, which is good intentions wind up having innocent people die. And this isn't just sometimes or even 1 in 2 instances or 1 in 3 instances. It's basically 10 out of 10 times humanitarian intervention over time results in more destabilization, more arming of local groups, more violence, more death, more destruction, more rape in the medium and long terms. And it's never something that she discusses, which is a shame, because this incident, I think, should have really forced a reconsideration of everything that she thought she was doing with U.S. military power in the world.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, no, there's nothing. It's just such a depressing, such a perfect encapsulation of all of the dynamics here and all of the arrogance and all of the incredible human cost, even for, the people that certainly the powers of the world would obviously, and I will say their immense arrogance, think they are acting on behalf. Final question. We've talked about this before. Because your work is a great synthesis of reworking the intellectual models that people use when they think about foreign policy, and then actually meeting with and dismantling the actual bureaucracy that has concentrated so much foreign policy making in the executive branch, and the sort of day-to-day running of let's say the military-industrial complex. In the past couple of months, Sanders certainly, he's called for freeing Lula, which I think is hugely innately important, but is also a stand-in for a willingness to buck U.S. foreign policy in a pretty significant way on behalf of an independent and thoughtful center-left leader who defied U.S. interests abroad. He's talked about cutting military spending. He has a Green New Deal, which seems to provide a model of cooperating with places like China and Russia in a way that actually deals with solving the most serious collective problem we face. Do you think Sanders is putting actual points on the board here in terms of rethinking some of these things and putting new ideas forward?
I really do, and I think that has a lot to do with Matt Duss. I think actually Duss was quoted in an Atlantic article today where he basically said the one thing that we know for sure is we want to ramp down and eventually get out of the Middle East. We know that for sure, and we want to cut down military spending, and we want to work with Russia and China on climate. But the most important thing that he said to me was that basically everything else is on the table, and I think that's what's most important. And I want to emphasize, I and no one really writing right now has all the answers, but now is a time for intellectual discussion, debate, and ferment, because we really haven't had one in the last 30 years. And to some degree, we really haven't had one in the last 70 years, rethinking America's global role and whether, quote unquote, American leadership, i.e. American empire, is something that's actually good for most Americans, or let alone most people in the world. So I think Bernie has been putting up, I think, significant points with everything you just said, but really importantly has shown that he's open to listening to new voices and also just rethinking some of the intellectual premises that he spent his life growing up within.
Daniel Bessner, as always, much appreciated. The piece is The Fog of Intervention. It's in the New Republic. Daniel Bessner, thank you so much.
Thanks, Michael. Take it easy, man.
Take care, man. All right, folks, definitely read that Bessner piece. It's important. And that there's some HBO documentary where they're just flying around with power. It's pretty dull, frankly. And then out of nowhere, there's this event. There's this killing of this kid in Cameroon. And, you know, I mean, look, Power obviously is affected by it. She's not happy about it. But it's such the arrogance of the whole policy set, and even being there to begin with in some respects. And then the fact that, you know, of course there wasn't like, hey, maybe we should be slow. And this armored convoy were blaring through this area in a place where there aren't many cars and kids are out playing. The incredible arrogance and human cost of that really distills so much. And I want to tell you about Hunt a Killer. Hunt a Killer is the murder box that immerses you in an ongoing experience. With an everyday delivery or episode, you will dive deeper into what it's like to be a detective, shifting through piles of documents, evidence, and case files until you crack the case. Right now, just for our listeners, you can go to huntakiller.com/majority for 20% off of your first box. They only accept 200 members a day, so hurry up, take advantage of this offer. That's huntakiller.com/majority for 20% off your first box, huntakiller.com/majority. On Tuesday's Michael Brooks show, we talked with Keeanga Yamada-Taylor about from Black Lives Matter to Black Liberation, reform versus revolution, why that's a very unhelpful dichotomy, and how that relates to really understanding the unparalleled significance and the importance of the Bernie Sanders campaign. Bhaskar Sunkara, Napoleon the Legend, and we talked about Christopher Hitchens. We talked about the Comoros Islands and French imperialism, commentary on West Papua, and reflected on the Broad Front Coalition elections in Uruguay, plus a ton more, some of which you can get a flavor of by watching our clips on the Michael Brooks Show on YouTube. Check it out. But of course, the best thing to do is to go to patreon.com/TMBS, where you will also get this Sunday with Bill Fletcher Jr. an illicit history of a Robert Mugabe and modern Zimbabwe. Patreon.com/TMBS, Michael Brooks Show on YouTube. Jamie, what's going on?
This week on the Antifada, we have on our friend Sophie St. Thomas, who is a sex and weed journalist, to talk about my trip to LA, hurricane sex, pickup artist magic, octopus weed, relationship boardigism, and Alexandra Kolontais' seminal essay, Make Way for Winged Eros. We also have a bonus with more Sophie St. Thomas coming out on Friday. And next week, I'm very, very excited to announce that we have on Aaron Bastani from Novara Media to talk about his awesome new book, Fully Automated Luxury Communism.
Speaking of Eros, did you guys talk about Dennis Prager's on visual stimulation yesterday?
We did not.
Oh, maybe we'll do that for
Seems
the fun
like an oversight on our part, really.
Jesus Christ.
Hello.
For a Literary Hangover, I did part 2 of James Fenimore Cooper's The Pioneers, which is the first in his series on Natty Bumppo, and sort of, I don't know, maybe one of the earliest. He was the first guy who really made a living writing fiction in America, and that was basically not the first book he got successful on, but the first giant series, and he did many sequels on it in true American fashion. So check that out, folks.
Awesome. All right, everybody. It's going to be a short, fun half, so we'll see what we get to, but we will see you there. Of course, become a member of the Majority Report, and tonight at about 7:40, we will start streaming the Bates.
Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous, you're a little bit upset, you're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's a good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy!
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey Sam, hey Andy, you guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
I think I might be a Nazi.
Agreed.
No.
Death to America.
Do.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
Welcome back to the fun half. All right, let's take a call out of the gate. You are calling from a 720 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hello, 720, Sam from Denver.
Sam from Denver. How you doing? What's on your mind?
Oh, all right. Let's see. Yesterday, you guys got into a little bit of an idea of a theory of change, and I just wanted to maybe share my harebrained idea with you guys.
All right, Matt, can I have my board, please?
Excuse
Go
me?
ahead. All right, now you're ready. Go ahead. What's your
okay?
What's your theory?
Okay, this is definitely harebrained, but something I have a experience in is making your own new religious movement.
Okay. I'm going to give you a pretty tight leash on this one. Not all of us are trying to start cults in this room. Go ahead.
That's true.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true. But basically, where I'm going with this is over the past probably 10 years or so. Basically, me and people got together, over the internet and stuff, and we've basically created a base of like solidarity and mutual aid for each other.
Awesome.
And basically, the idea behind it is because I know there's this the sort of traditional institutions have gone to the wayside. A lot of current religious traditions have have a lot of ideological baggage.
Can you just maybe? So what exactly did you guys do?
Yeah, get to the tax part.
Yeah.
Get to the tax part.
I mean, that's where this has to go.
Because we're not libertarian. Some of us are libertarians, but it's basically. There's a couple things. One thing that we found, I found that we've been able to do is we've been able to sort of pick people up in their sort of libertarian to fascist pipeline and sort of turn them around to something, little, maybe a fantasy that's a little bit better.
Okay, all right. I guess I'm just not really sure what you're
what's
talking
the religion?
about.
Does this cult have a website?
Do you have like a source that you could point people to? Because we could check it out that way.
Well, yeah. If you want to look at a specific group that I have, we have a bunch of free literature on dkmu.org.
dkmu.org. Thank you. Thanks for the call, man.
You gotta have literature.
Gotta have literature. Gotta have.
I don't see what the point of setting up a religion is unless you're going to get tax breaks.
Exempt.
Yeah.
I literally want to set up my own, like, my life as religion, bro.
I mean, Scientology killed it. Like
Scientology.
You combine how much this country favors real estate, holding companies and religions, and you just marry those two things.
Yeah, they've had a pretty good run. I think they might be coming to the end right now, though.
They'll live on through their real estate.
They're gonna be fine. You're calling from a 203 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
I don't know about this DKM stuff.
It is you. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Rudy, Connecticut.
Hey, Rudy. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I wanted to send you guys some materials about utilities and sort of comment on your guest from Vox last week. Didn't seem to really know what he was talking about, so... Could I send you something? I work.
Well, yeah, you could definitely make
or
it
you
a
could
10.
just tell us.
I mean, you
right
could,
now.
Yeah, you could tell us real quick, but also send stuff.
I kind of can't because I kind of can't.
I don't. Okay, I'm not totally sure the purpose of the call. All right. So you have our email address?
Yeah. Is it just? Can you just look out for the email?
I will tell. I will
cryptic calls.
Yeah.
Radio.
All right, man. Thank you.
In the future,
send the email.
guys, just send the email and
I like it the one day, like, because people whine sometimes, like, make us too weak. He's mean to callers.
Here's the
should take
truth.
more time. And then it's like, I'm like, you know what? Let me try to absorb that criticism. And then I get the calls today where it's just like, there's going to be an email coming. We can't talk about it.
I mean, unless they are like
Jesus
secret
Christ.
information from, if it's emails from like the Koch brothers, I'm down for it. But
look, I think that guest, and look, there's different viewpoints on the show. You would not be hard to convince me.
I'd lean towards Kate Aronoff on the climate
stuff.
Yeah,
I think I would say read Kate Aronoff.
I'd also say there is a 0% chance that email cuts any kind of line. It'll be got to when it gets to, right? That's how email works in this office. Sorry. Even if you call it.
And here's what I'll say. There's one, there is a way to skip the line and you should be able to figure it out. But I won't spell it out for you because I don't want everybody to do it. But if you give it a little bit of thought of how you might be able to get Sam's attention quickly, I think you could probably tease it out.
Just put libertarian debate.
Jesus.
Well,
not everybody will do it.
Here's what I thought you were going to say. I thought you were going to say, never mind.
Oh my God, it's from Prince Tunde in Nigeria. Yes, I will invest our YouTube proceedings in unlocking a foreign.
Wouldn't it be awesome if Sam really was just super susceptible to email schemes? And we were always just like, no, Sam, this doesn't sound right.
No. It's a bit. He's a member of the royal family. You wouldn't understand.
I need to send him $2,000 and he's going to debate us on the air.
Look, if you are willing to send my cousin $3,000, he is a big libertarian leader in Nigeria.
You'll get it right back.
He will do a 45-minute debate with you for only a $2,000 charge, which you will get rebated, so it only is $50.
Brendan, send him the money now.
I was like, wait, he wants a parcel envelope delivered to Midtown? Just do it.
Unfortunately, I think Sam is way too sneaky for that.
Yes, I do think.
No,
so.
actually, Sam's pretty good with those types of scams.
God,
he would mess with them so hard.
Yeah, that's actually one of the other great joy in Sam's life. It's like terrorizing petty scam artists.
If there was a libertarian scam artist,
that would be like the Sam orgy of life. If that actually existed,
he would die happy.
Ever since the video that we did about the where Sam called the the Social Security scam or whatever, I've recorded.
That was so funny.
We've recorded like 8 different attempts at trying to recapture that lightning, and we just haven't been able to do it.
I have never met somebody in my life who is more like, for everybody else, it's like, oh my God, how did this phone get? Sam better challenge Chuck Schumer, because Chuck Schumer's trying to make sure that those phone calls don't happen.
Yeah, it's a shot. I said it's a shot at our content.
Yeah, it's a shot at our content. It's a direct line at the Majority Report content pipeline. I've never seen anybody more excited to get a call offer for a fake Caribbean cruise than Sam in my life.
Sam will literally delay prep so he can, if he gets an email from a family member who's like, "Here's a number that a scam artist just told me to call."
Hold on. All right. So Joe Biden still leads in the polls, although there's a new poll where Bernie Sanders has finally overtaken him in New Hampshire.
About time. New Hampshire.
About time.
If you're a New Hampshire person and you're listening to this and you're not actively working to get Bernie Sanders elected, you need to stop listening to this podcast.
Turn this off and get going for Bernie. But the Biden campaign has also been saying basically that Iowa is not make or break, I believe, is the kind of indications that are coming out, which is a very bad sign if they're doing that this far out from the caucuses.
It's so far out.
If he loses Iowa and New Hampshire, this is really an entirely different dynamic. I mean, look, South Carolina is a very strong state for Joe Biden, and I wouldn't count him out. And in fact, I still, just because I want to be cautious about this, because I really do think people were kind of naive about his appeal coming out of the gate and underestimated it. If he has a decent debate performance tonight, there's the narrative for the next several weeks, because he's been getting beaten up on for a long time. He hasn't looked good. If he can pull it together, your analysis should not be predicated on the fact that he's definitely going to collapse. Unfortunately, that's not true, as much as we all very much want it to be true. That being said, I mean, you talk about the establishment is held together by glue and gum. The fact that Joe Biden, who really clearly might not be physically, mentally up for doing this, in addition to having a decades-long terrible record in all of the key issues, as well as things like the bankruptcy bill, they are still talking electability as just on a performance level that becomes increasingly questionable. Here's Richard Haass. He's the head of the Council on Foreign Relations, and they're talking with the Morning Joe team about the electability argument.
And to either Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders.
The other possibility is Joe Biden does really well. And for Democrats, that is the best bet, because it's going to be pretty hard for an Elizabeth Warren or Kamala Harris to establish that comfort level with perhaps the people who voted for Trump, who need a place to go, who won't do it again. They'll vote for Biden. I'm not sure they'll vote for anyone else in the Democratic field.
Well,
and so the hope for the Democrats, the best hope, is that Biden gets really strong on the stage.
What Donald Trump's team thinks is, even if they don't vote for Biden, right?
Yeah.
They will stay home thinking, well, Biden isn't a, quote, socialist. Biden is not going to take away my family's health insurance. Right. Biden is not going to make us
comfort level.
Find a new pediatrician for our children. Biden is not going to decriminalize illegal immigration, all of these things. So they go, I'm not going to vote for the guy, but I can't vote for Donald Trump either. The guy's just acted too crazy. I'm going to stay at home, and would be one of those
Biden's the best case scenario for the Democrats.
Whereas with Elizabeth Warren, they believe whether it's with Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, they will actually motivate people who are skeptical on Trump to go out and vote. And I think a lot of Democrats, certainly behind the scenes, agree with that analysis.
Coming up a lot.
So I have no doubt that Democrats behind the scenes believe that analysis. Democrats who thought that you could shutter the Think for Progress blog, basically replace it with scabs and nobody would notice. There's a lot of people who would talk to Joe Scarborough on background who are identified with the Democratic Party who are more out of touch with reality than Donald Trump. And I just want to say, I mean, this projection, and look, there is no question that there might be some people who get freaked out by the socialism word. There's a ton of areas that Elizabeth Warren is vulnerable on, including ones that she should be vulnerable on and ones that are frankly just misogyny. But this is like the quintessential clip of the projection of the media class with normal voters. The people who flipped from Obama to Trump, that have not either just become right-wing reactionary crackpots and are now Republicans, or people who are totally disaffected, which might be a thing. The key distribution of a couple 100,000 people, maybe even less, in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan voted for Trump, and the polling bears this out if you get into the details of the polling, because of promises on economic questions. And if you look at what the center is in the country, even what the center is in the United Kingdom, for God's sake, it is to the right on social issues, to the left on economic issues. Period. These people's assertions are their own psychological needs and projections. This is what they will do. But fortunately for us, Bernie Sanders doesn't need to win Westchester. He doesn't need to win the MSNBC Green Room. He needs to win Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, which he is better positioned to do than any other candidate besides possibly Joe Biden. And Joe Biden can be picked apart for voting for every single trade agreement that has decimated these states, for voting for and pushing through the bankruptcy bill that has gutted millions of Americans' lives, and for various other key corporate assaults on the very people that these delusional, moronic, crazy ghouls claim to be speaking for.
Yeah. Mika and Joe, here's a hot take. Has no more informational value than Diamond and Silk.
Oh, snap.
Totally.
No, that's
and
definitely
far
true.
less entertainment value.
Oh, absolutely. I just want to add, we've been going back and forth a lot about whether people all voted for Trump out of racism or economic anxiety, right? And I think, probably on balance, it's more racism, but the people who did vote for Trump out of economic anxiety are all in those swing states. And I would hope if someone can speak to their class interests in the way that Bernie does and show how much Trump's promises are garbage, that they can come along. And it doesn't mean changing on any of these social issues. It doesn't mean that the Democrats are going to get more racist. It means that we're going to speak to their economic interests and say we don't want any of that other nonsense.
And none of them are talking about compromising. In fact, of course, Bernie's put forward strong issues on things like civil rights. But the other really important thing to mention, because they only go with what will depress turnout, if you look at the maps of the counties that went Obama to Trump in terms of donor base, it's Bernie. Small dollar donations from counties that went from Obama to Trump, Bernie dominates in terms of donations.
And also, I also want to mention that there is the X factor that Biden does not have, which is all of the people who don't normally vote. All of the people who did not turn out last time around, who could maybe be persuaded to turn out this time around if somebody speaks to their economic interests. And those people are by and large poorer. They're by and large less white than the people who currently vote. So hopefully Bernie has a case to be made there.
Absolutely. There's a water crisis happening in Newark. We discussed this recently on TMBS, and there's an incredible contrast between the specific wealth concentration, although of course it's totally not distributed fairly at all, but there is an enormous wealth in New York City and an enormous poverty in Newark, which is just, miles away. We're going to be seeing this nationally. The infrastructure upgrades of the New Deal that delivered a lot of water to people and was an incredible achievement, they're coming to a head. 60, 70 years is about the lifespan of these things, of these pipe systems. And of course, because of austerity and neoliberalism, there hasn't been public investment into upgrading and keeping them safe and updated. And this is, this is a serious national crisis. I mean, this is lead in water. This damages people's brains for life. One of the most depressing and cynical takes that I saw, I forget who, but somebody said on Twitter, maybe it will take another violence outbreak like the 80s to get serious about this. One of the most compelling arguments about certain spikes in violent crime could be correlated with lead pollution. This is from Democracy Now! This is Eric Olson from the Natural Resources Defense Council, really explaining the scope of the crisis in Newark, which we all need to be paying attention to. We all need to be talking about. Cory Booker is pretty much irrelevant in the presidential race, but I do want to say tonight he's going to be posturing and preening a lot and talking about justice and this and that. When he was mayor of Newark, he was able to get hundreds of millions of dollars leveraged from Facebook, hedge funds, and all of these other enormous sites of resources, essentially to terrorize teachers' unions and do a Betsy DeVos public education agenda. I didn't hear him a single time when he was mayor of Newark say, we need to get serious about the water crisis in this city.
Basically, what we have is a public health crisis in Newark. Unfortunately, the lead levels in the drinking water in Newark are some of the highest in the country that have been recorded in recent years for any city. So basically what's happening is bottled water is being distributed to some citizens in Newark because the filters didn't look like they were working. There's more tests going on to figure out why that's the case. But we've got a lot of people across the city, especially children, who are really put at risk. The best estimates from 2017 are that at least 700 kids in Newark have elevated blood lead levels. We don't know how much of that is from the drinking water, but the bottom line is that we've got real health risks in Newark, and we need to fix the problem, and the city has been pretty slow to getting around to taking action on it.
There's no problem with holding the city leadership accountable. The mayor should be held accountable. I've heard some criticisms of the mayor, but the notion that you're framing what is first a federal problem, and then even inside New Jersey, these cities that have been starved of investment in Chris Christie's reign was a atrocity in terms of redistribution to wealthy people and austerity. So I don't like the frame at the end of it, but he's framing that correctly in terms of the scope. Here's another crisis. College students might want to actually get paid for their work. No, not this one. Actually, I don't care about that one. College students might actually want to get paid for generating obscene levels of wealth for the college industry. And I do say industry because college professional sports is an industry. We talked about this just the other day. Jamel Hill said that black athletes should be going to historically black colleges if they're not going to be paid. And she made a broader economic argument about that, which, of course, the right had a meltdown and misinterpretation of. And
that's an invitation for black athletes at universities that aren't taking this any issues on race seriously to withhold their labor, perhaps.
Absolutely. But the reality, and just even think more broadly, okay, there's the number one problem that people generating enormous wealth as laborers are not getting compensated. That's innately wrong, period, case closed. If you don't get that, you're delusional. And then think about, as an example, a college football player who's not going to make it into the NFL. They're doing a sport that could have lifelong physical and cognitive consequences on their bodies to make money for a league that they will not have a broader compensated future in, which is the argument, kind of like the internship argument, which, by the way, unpaid internships should also obviously be immediately made illegal. That's, and that's not going to happen for a lot of them. But if we did pay these laborers for their labor, there is one very big idiot that would have his experience significantly altered. And that very big idiot is Brian Kilmeade.
Think about this.
Would you watch a game just with these same athletes if they weren't representing your school? So Ohio State, you might love that team. Oh, they're playing for Ohio State. What if they were just playing for Ohio and they're just representing? Then they look as the second tier under the NFL. The thing that makes college sports attractive is they represent something, school and tradition. If you're going to pay them, just understand they're no longer students. Right. And the whole theory of playing college sports is over.
Their loyalties are to endorsements rather than the school.
Yeah.
But would they be playing for Ohio State or the Ohio State?
Well, the was not allowed to be trademarked. Sorry, guys.
No, there'd be AAA. There'd be the second best football league in the country, which would not have the attraction of the networks or the endorsements.
Well, let's get rid of the endorsements, then.
Yeah, let's get rid of the endorsements and the networks. Let's take that risk, Brian. Let's take that risk for paying laborers, giving free labor away to industries that are raking in millions of dollars. Let's take that risk.
Wouldn't they have more loyalty to the schools if the schools are actually paying them?
I think he's talking about the fans.
He's talking about the fans.
Oh, right.
He doesn't care about the kids.
That we've established.
Yes, he definitely doesn't care. I need to call back into the system. We'll only take one or two more calls if we can, but I got knocked out.
I love the idea that the second you start paying kids, like everyone's just going to stop watching college sports.
The illusion is like it's a magician or something.
Well, you know, when I found out, I mean, people asked me why I'm so mean to Brian Kilmeade, and it was like when I found out that he got paid, that he wasn't just having like a friendly breakfast conversation with his friends, where they worried about the Republic, but he's getting paid to do that. He's getting paid to be on Fox and Friends. I don't get paid to hang out with my friends. I was a little disturbed by that.
You're getting paid to do this, and we're your friends, Michael.
Well, that's true, but we should have kept that quietly. Also, Brendan's not my friend.
No, I know. I'm just.
Yeah. No. Well, you were doing that.
We're comrades. We're not friends.
Or definitely not that.
I think the rubber is going to hit the road with paying college athletes once they break down which sports make money under Title IX and which ones don't, and how they're going to distribute money to athletes.
Well, then,
and that's when they're going to divide them and break the whole movement.
Right.
So I hope that doesn't happen.
But then it could just be,
Solidarity.
well, it could be redistribution like anything else.
Yeah.
Like, you know, obviously certain, you know, basketball and football brings in money.
Whatever ends up
We're
happening,
gonna subsidize the other ones.
Yeah, whatever ends up happening, the stability will not, like, I don't think it will end up being like how unequal it is now.
Yeah,
Will be
exactly.
stable.
No, exactly.
That needs to be maintained throughout this whole process.
Jay Cool, hey Michael, I love TMBS and I know your love for Canadian politics. Jesus Christ. Well, can we look forward to live debate coverage of the Canadian debates? I can promise you absolutely not. That's definitely not going to happen. Next week at 6 o'clock on the TMBS YouTube channel, I will be doing a live stream with a very smart Canadian YouTuber about Canadian elections and building some type of hemispheric left. So there will be some more Canada coming, but debate coverage, come on. I barely want to do these debates.
Get out.
Yeah. Be real. All right, let's run through some more sound. In Israel, there are elections taking place. Now, this is clip number 6. There are no, look, there's no real alternatives in Israel. It's just a question of to what degree of subjugation of basic Palestinian rights we're talking about. Now, that being said, there are parties in the center, and this, I get, you could maybe in some ways domestically center left, that at the very least would like to keep some sort of formalities of democracy inside 67 borders, right? So there's the occupation of the West Bank, there's a siege and functional occupation over Gaza, and then inside Israel itself, although of course there's not full equity for Arab citizens, there is some more kind of sense that you're dealing with something analogous to a flawed democracy, maybe. But that argument is rested on institutional independence, which still exists to some extent in the judiciary. But a lot of the scandals affecting Netanyahu, because obviously, I mean, apartheid is not a voting issue, unfortunately, right now for most voters in Israel, but the fact that he might literally be undermining the independence of media, of judicial institutions. These are big things in minds for some Israeli voters. Now, he's going full to the hilt. He said that if he doesn't get reelected, the Arabs will, quote, annihilate Jewish Israelis. This is, an election with very little hope and mostly bad outcomes because that's the political situation. And I wanted to play this clip from, and Netanyahu just gets increasingly overt. I mean, he's always been an apartheid leader. Under Obama, in the beginning, he paid lip service to a two-state. Now he's talking about formal annexing of the West Bank, which, let's be really clear, it should have been already obvious to anybody with any kind of basic cognitive functioning what Israel is and what's happening in the Middle East. But this is it. I mean, this is like the last of even joke plausible deniability. And this is Nora Arakat, who's a Palestinian attorney and advocate, explaining it on Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman.
I think it's important to point out, as you have, that 1/3 of the West Bank is the Jordan Valley. It's the site of the richest sources of water, some of the richest sources of water in the West Bank, including the Jordan River Basin and the Dead Sea, as well as numerous springs. The World Bank has said that if Palestinians actually have access to these lands, it could be their Palestinian breadbasket, increasing their agricultural yield by $1.6 million annually. We are talking about a rich area where Palestinian farmers, where Palestinians cannot access for leisure, for livelihood, for home. And this is what's at stake. The other thing to point out is that there's already de facto annexation. A lot of attention is being placed on Netanyahu as he makes more bold and racist claims to his constituent base ahead of elections. But it's important to know that this is not about Netanyahu. This isn't even about the Israeli right. This is Israeli policy. In the aftermath of the 1967 war, Israel declared 60% of the Jordan Valley as a closed military zone and off basis. They built 3 outposts, military outposts in 1968, and under a labor government, built those into civilian settlements in the early 1970s. It was a Israeli labor minister, Yigal Allon, who declared that the Jordan Valley would be part of Israel's defensible borders. It was Israel's dove, Yitzhak Rabin, in 1995, who said that this would be part of Israel's final borders. And it was under the Oslo peace process that 90% of the Jordan Valley came under full Israeli civil and military control. What Netanyahu is doing now is basically taking this awful policy, this steady policy of settler colonial removal of Palestinian and encroachment of Palestinian lands to its logical end, which is to say, well, now it's just ours.
Well, that's it. That's undebatable. Be in reality about that place. I mean, you can defend it, but if you're going to defend it, you have to appeal to emotional nationalist arguments. That's reality. That is as close as 2 + 2 = 4 in politics as there could be. Another one that is not debatable, and this will lead to clip number 7, is what's happening in Kashmir. Now, yes, is there a longer history to what's happening in Kashmir? Without a doubt. There's a longer history of Israel-Palestine. And in fact, in Israel-Palestine, of course, there have been terrorist actions that have murdered innocent Israelis, without a doubt. But we need a political understanding that understands the structure behind what's happening. And in Kashmir, you have a disputed territory. There was a balance reached in the founding of the independent state of India by Nehru, giving it a significant autonomy. In the 1980s, there was a push for a referendum, and there has never been one. It was before the BJP Hindu far-right nationalist government of Narendra Modi tore the Indian constitution and deployed even more troops to Kashmir. Kashmir was already, by many estimates, the most militarized place on the planet. More troop presence to civilian presence. Now, and that has long-run documentation of Indian rights abuses in Kashmir. Now, yes, do Pakistanis government support terrorist groups? Definitely. Is there a small Pakistani territory of Kashmir as well? Absolutely. Does this have big regional stakes for the most likely place in the world for an actual armed nuclear conflict? definitely. But what cannot be debated, denied, or obfuscated is that what the Indian government is doing in Kashmir now, a complete information blackout. Children as young, boys as young as 12 years old are being detained, separated from their families. Local government administrators who were moderates have been detained. Their families are being separated. There's reports of torture, sexual abuse, physical abuse, families being removed from their homes, because this is actually also a great money-making opportunity. Kashmir has enormous travel opportunities as well. This is a way of also cleaning out the population and redesigning the ethnic makeup, just like you see in West Papua and Indonesia, and like you see in Tibet for that matter. So this is something that requires a clear policy analysis, a sense of history, and some basic moral clarity. Bernie Sanders, of course, provided that a couple of weeks ago. The other candidates, not, as Cornel West would say, a mumbling word, which does not surprise me. This is an area where this is a real place of challenge. And just as, Joe Biden is totally conventional on foreign policy and awful, and just as Elizabeth Warren has never been willing to buck the foreign policy consensus, that's not a surprise, let alone, of course, the other candidates. But this is Tulsi Gabbard, who, again, I'm told is the peace candidate, hemming and hawing about this. And look, isolationism is great. It's better than interventionism. But I do want some form of global solidarity. I understand Modi is popular. Many authoritarian leaders are popular. That means not a goddamn thing. The reality is this tearing of the Indian Constitution and deployment of troops is a threat for a global war, and it's a systemic rights violation of Kashmiris. Nothing should obscure that, but this clip does.
On the issue in Kashmir, what is your personal idea as to how we deal with such a complex situation instead of painting it as a black and white issue?
Yeah, well, first of all, recognizing that it is complex. It is not as clear cut as this one side versus this one side. I think it's important as outsiders looking in to understand the complex history of Kashmir and what has happened to people there in the past, and how many families were driven from their homes there and fled and have not been able to return home. How the previous government had policies in place that made homosexuality illegal, that suppressed the voices of women, that made it. I met a woman a couple of days ago who said that she, as a Kashmiri woman, had no rights to own property there in her homeland. So these changes are things that are happening in a sovereign country. They're very difficult. There are concerns that should be addressed about human rights violations and civil rights violations. But overall, I think this is a situation, again, in a sovereign country that must be worked out by all sides who have a stake in their own future there.
Many sides.
Many sides. Just as an example, this is a piece in The Guardian. My son is one of Kashmir's disappeared. When will India tell the truth about their fate? Up to 10,000 people have been victims of forced disappearances, including my son. That's a piece that came out just today in The Guardian. Look, this is very analogous to Israel. We can talk all day about the rights violations. Yes, Hamas does not have a good record on the rights of the LGBT community, or women for that matter. Irrelevant. It's not relevant from the perspective of speaking out on and articulating what we value everywhere internationally, but then you have to speak out against the siege on Gaza. You have to speak out against the siege on Kashmir. And then, of course, you also talk about rights violations everywhere by every people. But the idea that you are going to lecture a place and wait for complete policy perfection before you oppose colonialism is demented. I think the other point that's more to the point with her worldview is this notion of sovereignty. And I think, again, that's the thing, that when you look at her frame, when she does something that's 100% right, like opposing U.S. intervention and U.S. regime change efforts in Venezuela, which he's 100% right about, she talks about, respecting another country's government, basically. But there's also a reason that she does not speak about the Bolsonaro government in Brazil or call for Lula to be freed, because she doesn't have a sort of cross-boundary solidarity perspective. She has a non-interventionist non-interventionist sovereignty perspective, which I have respect for in some ways. It's a valid viewpoint, but it's not a progressive one. And it's not one that has a framework for dealing with how we talk about what's happening in Kashmir at all. What's this, Matt?
Yeah, so this is, I think, something she posted on because of 9/11.
Is this new?
Yes. That's why I kind of wanted to hold off on it. But
Okay,
I think this is her.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the point is that her rhetoric when it specifically comes to the war on terrorism, so-called war on terrorism, is radically different. So, we're not going to be finding a systemic critique of drones or anything like that.
Whenever she said this, it says, we all want peace, but unfortunately it is not possible for us to unilaterally end this war. Either we defeat them, including their ideology, or they will defeat us. And
that goes back to her, her beginning sort of rise in national profile during the Obama administration, which was complaining that Obama did not use the phrase Muslim or Islamic terrorism and voting against the settlement of Syrian refugees. In order to be a refugee in the United States, you would have already gone through at least a year, most likely 2 years, of the most hardcore international vetting imaginable in a conflict that we have helped accelerate and perpetuate on frankly, all sides of it. I don't know how you reconcile that vote with a humanitarian impulse. You can't. You can't.
No. And on a related note, obviously Al-Qaeda and Hamas are hugely problematic. We're not on their team. But I was
definitely
talking.
Not. Underscore that.
Yes, certainly. But I was talking with some of my friends yesterday about this. Think about the impact that 9/11 had on our culture in the U.S. And then think about all of the horrible things that the U.S. has done to other countries that 9/11 pales in comparison to.
Definitely.
And then think about how it must have impacted people over there.
Oh, well, the idea that other countries wouldn't have the same impulses towards extreme nationalist and fanatic religious movements in play. Absolutely. We take one atrocity. They take atrocities on a daily basis from us in Pakistan or Yemen, as an example. It's demented, insane, arrogant, ridiculous, stupid to not think that that wouldn't feed their politics. Of course, that's a really important point. I agree 100%. You're calling from a 602 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
This is me?
Yes, this is you.
Hey, Michael, it's Armand in Vietnam.
Hey, Armand, what's going on? What's on your mind?
Hey, I want to talk about two things. Real quick, I've had this theory for a while about the denuclearization of North Korea. Is it far off to think that if China really wanted North Korea to be denuclearized, that they could make it happen in a matter of weeks or maybe months?
I think that is actually pretty far off. Yes. I think China does have suction, obviously, with North Korea, but I don't think that they have that capacity, or frankly, they might have already done it. They might have already leaned in on them more. My reading, and I need to read more and learn more about that, is that China does not have its snap fingers ability that some people seem to think they have over North Korea.
Okay, because my understanding was, China, has a pretty large agricultural support for the country.
No, they definitely support. They definitely support them without a doubt. Of course.
Okay, and then mostly what I wanted to talk about is I'm half Turkish, so I have some interest in hearing your thoughts about, as Erdogan is losing more and more elections, do you think he's going to do something radical? I mean, AK Party is starting to fall apart. Party leaders are starting to shift over and start a party under a new name. Where do you see Turkey going in the next year? And do you think Erdogan is going to continue, sort of getting or using more and more authoritarian power to keep his place?
Yes. The short answer is yes. And I think the question is
how far can he go?
Well, how big can the coalition that takes him on be? I mean, one of the problems and tensions is like a major part of confronting Erdogan was the HDP. You had this really impressive Kurdish political party that expanded even beyond advocating for Kurdish civil rights, which is really important there, but actually really made themselves a modern social democratic party. And they challenged, the economic policies, the environmental policies of the Erdogan government. Then Erdogan made their leaders political prisoners and made up fake terrorism charges about them. And amongst, the CHP and other opposition forces, there's still a lot of that, really old school nationalist sort of politics. So I think the question is how tight can the coalition be against Erdogan in terms of broadening out people's conception of Turkishness and who, gets to be in or out of the circle. But I will be doing more coverage on it. I appreciate the call, man. Thank you. All right. Let's do one more piece of sound. What do we have? That's kind of it. There isn't that much more. Sure. All right, let's do Warren and Varney. Okay. So Elizabeth Warren has a wealth tax. Bernie Sanders has a bigger wealth tax. Elizabeth Warren wants to fair the game up a bit. She still says she's a capitalist to her bones, which might be reassuring to a certain segment of voters. But any scenario where even the most modest improvement of the lot of working people is going to make Stuart Varney throw up his green juice smoothie.
Elizabeth Warren has been gaining ground. In many polls, she is now right behind Joe Biden, and the gap is narrowing. She bashes the rich, and she bashes capitalism. To far-left activists, that's good.
She doesn't bash capitalism.
She does not bash capitalism.
She identifies as a capitalist, even though, as far as I know, she's not technically a capitalist.
She wants to make capitalism better.
Yeah, she's a capitalist reformer.
They love her wealth tax. They love the revolution she demands for corporate America. So let's look at those policies. What impact would they really have? Okay, her wealth tax would have cut the net worth of the 15 richest Americans in half. Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates would have had hundreds of billions of dollars confiscated. Now, some people think that's just fine. They don't need all that
Here's
money.
what I think. Should be more.
Should be far more. But
should be
good.
Infinitely more. But I will clap for a base hit. So, okay, keep it going.
Yeah, frankly, they should both be proposing caps on how much wealth the
right. There should be a limit as to how much one person can suck out to begin with. But okay.
They don't need all that money. It's not fair. Senator Warren is playing to the jealousy factor, always present in politics and always ugly. Truth is, accumulated private capital is the engine of growth and innovation for the future. Confiscate it, and we all suffer. Then, more importantly, there is her Accountable Capitalism Act, and this is a real threat to everybody's money. Senator Warren would force all big companies to take a lot of their profit away from shareholders, and it would be given to the workforce, the community, customers, the local and global environment, and community and societal factors, whatever that is. America's great companies forced to dance to a socialist drumbeat. Forget about investing in stocks for your retirement. The profits that support stock prices would have been diverted. 73% of the value of all stocks today is held by people over 55. Stocks are your retirement vehicle. Warren would ruin your retirement. The bottom line is this: socialists don't redistribute wealth, they destroy it.
Wow. I mean, it's just incredible, like, how crackpot, these guys are so insane that somebody's saying, like, she's not even talking about, like, this is not New Deal's ambition. She's literally saying, like, I mean, basically, Warren is proposing a policy set that if American politics wasn't so utterly corrupted and hollowed out in the last couple of decades, this is what you would have done the whole time. You would have said, we're going to trade. We're going to kind of transition the economy. It's not going to be good for a lot of the sectors of the workforce. But what we're going to do is we're going to incorporate some of the German stakeholder models. We're going to have regulation that's fit to purpose, that parallels the modern economy. Like, I'm in no way diminishing what she's putting on the table to saying like what Bernie's offering really is a fundamental disjuncture in terms of distribution, power, and democracy. That's why I support him. Warren's politics are like, if we weren't so insanely cravenly corrupt, we would have been doing all of these things every step of the way. It would have just, we would have gone, and then smart people like Elizabeth Warren could have gone to a Clinton administration and been like, well, you know what, you probably shouldn't do this with derivatives, and you still need bankruptcy protections. And Bill Clinton would be like, all right, that sounds about right. We need to be fit to purpose. Instead of like, well, I hear that, but I also hear this amazing fucking party that Robert Rubin's hosting. If we can only say that people can count future pretend profits as current profits.
Yeah, well, they're going to say this stuff no matter what the policies
That
are,
is also
as long
true.
as this person is to the left of center. They said the exact same stuff about Obama.
They said it about
They said he
Obama, who's
was
not even, who is not to the
socialist.
left of center.
So,
He's not to
given
the
that
left,
fact, I don't think that we should be afraid of socialistic policies on the left, because they're going to call them that no matter what they are.
Even noted right-wing cyborg Pete Buttigieg has made the same point.
If we're at the point where they have to justify or argue for shareholders getting profits over workers, I think we're at a pretty good place.
Yeah, I think we're doing pretty well when
'Cause
it's
I
just like money back for the community. What
Shareholders-
about people who shareholders? I mean, you
Well,
have to
he
be-
tries to paint shareholders as workers, and you know they play to their audience. They scare old people.
this
They
is
say
the-
your retirement's going to be ruined. When in fact, the thing that's actually going to ruin your retirement is if they privatize Social Security. If we don't get single payer health care, if you don't have long term care, that's what's going to ruin your retirement.
Well, that's 100% right, but it's also interesting that like this is the other big advantage of ambitious universal programs and at least some structural programs, because it's easier to lie and fearmonger. Like there's going to be some people in the audience, they'll believe any lie that you tell about Venezuela or whatever group they're demonizing and lying about. But that's a little bit higher likelihood of like, well, I agree with you about all that, but I'm on Social Security. And actually, maybe this Wall Street has not been so great for my personal retirement. Like when you're starting to BS about people's actual like stuff they might have actual interaction with all these fantasies about, you're talking about a different ballgame. And I think a harder lie to pull off. All right, final call of the day. Apologies, obviously dozens we couldn't get to. I'm just picking randomly. You're calling from a 775 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? Oh, excuse me, 770.
Hello, was that?
Yeah, my bad. 770. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Hey, Matt. Hey, Jamie. Hey, Michael. This is David in Atlanta.
Hey, David, what's going on?
Just calling because it's actually kind of fortuitous that you all played the Tulsi clip, but I'm making a confession. Y'all were talking about cults earlier, too. I'm a deconverted Tulsi toady, and I'm
Wow.
like Barry Weiss. I know what that word means when I use it.
What happened?
Yeah,
How did you get
I saw-
deprogrammed?
Yes, and in large part thanks to y'all too. Y'all have, and especially you, Michael, have been pretty consistently critical of her from the left, and it's also been unnerving to me that almost all the criticism of her is from the left. I love.
Well, I
it when
want
she
to
goes
just
on
to be fair.
MSNBC
There's a lot
and-
of total trash, disingenuous criticism of her from the Democratic center, and they're in zero position to criticize her on human rights stuff. They support, Israel no matter what. They support Saudi Arabia, which she has a better position on than they do. But yes, if you have a left internationalist perspective, if somebody said, hey, Tulsi Gabbard's kind of interesting and heterodox, and she's got some good ideas, she's got some bad ideas, she's got some really bad associations, she's put some interesting things forward, and she's kind of cool, she's kind of interesting, whatever, I wouldn't have any problem with it. I just have a problem. Well, I mean, one, I have a problem with anybody eating from Bernie's vote. That's number one. And number two, I have a real problem at a time when there is an opportunity, like Daniel Bessner is saying, to actually create potentially a framework for some type of actual post-empire foreign policy to just sort of repackage isolationism. I'm not with it.
And I wonder if it's asking too much to expect. At this point, I'm like, baseline, okay, obviously, you want to get out of Afghanistan and Iraq. Obviously, we need to stop doing regime change. But I want to hear a candidate say anti-imperialism, post-colonialism, and, again, it may be just because of how much the defense contractors and the foreign policy establishment has its grips and on the Democratic Party, almost even sometimes more so than the Republican, I don't know if it's asking too much. I also kind of came to the conclusion that I love Glenn Greenwald too, but him showing up on Tucker Carlson and her, I get it if you want to criticize the DNC, do it with other leftists. Don't buddy up with Republicans and neoconservatives and reactionaries like him.
I mean, I gotta say, Glenn
Absolutely.
Greenwald can do whatever he wants. He's like, I mean, I find frankly people in the relative safety, criticizing him when he is like in an extremely serious situation, I just can't get with. And even the way he's used that platform, he used being on Fox to humiliate Bolsonaro, and he even got Tucker Carlson to record. Tucker Carlson recorded a message calling for the protection of Glenn Greenwald and the Intercept staff, which is like the way the Brazilian right holds Fox News. That would be sort of like, Sam Harris saying that, telling his people to stop bothering me on Twitter or something. So I do want to make that distinction, but I will say that, yes, I think the way it's very clear to me, and I know people are so touchy about it, and they'll even say she's not an isolationist because she said this, she said that, blah, 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 blah. But the reality is that the core component of the argument is not a solidarity one. And look, I don't know if a presidential candidate is going to use colonialism and imperialism, but again, as I say, look at the Lula case. He's in jail.
Yeah.
In no small part. The DOJ backed that investigation to the hilt. And I have zero doubt that the fact that he would not allow those salt layer oil reserves to be accessible to U.S. and foreign investment, that he was going to guard a state industry which they've used for enormous social investment in Petrobras, that ran afoul of the U.S. government, as well as any number of other things he was doing with the BRIC economies and other really important sort of moves for global autonomy. So when Bernie says free Lula, it's not just the right thing to do. It's a functional step in the direction of anti-imperialism and anti-colonialism. So don't worry so much about the rhetoric of what you'll get from a candidate. Worry about those tangibles. And he's starting to put points on the board. I really appreciate the call, man. Thank you so much. Let's do 2-3 IMs and then we will leave because we're coming back here. Is everybody going to be here?
Yep.
Debate night. It's debate night.
Oh, boy.
Get pizza. It's debate night. I think it's going to be very interesting because what Warren is going to do is
I like when Sam gets all excited for his little pre-gaming of what he thinks going to happen.
Yeah. God, the primaries are so far out still.
They really are. We should have a British election cycle. This thing should be over in 6 weeks.
Yeah, no, we should not be allowed to even talk about them at this point.
The Republican debates were so much more fun.
The Republican debates were awesome. Literally. And then there'll be an aircraft carrier and they'll go, and then because Obama's weak.
Yeah. Like the thing about
Obama's weak. What about you?
What about you?
You weak, dumb, weirdo,
dumb guy,
weird dressed dumb guy.
And the crowd goes wild for some reason.
The crowd's all like, yeah, he's a weird dressed dumb guy.
Yeah. With the Dem debates, it's just like
it's just a bunch of twerps. Like just
Bernie saying what we've heard him say because it's what needs to be said.
Right. And then everybody else just like, well, actually, let's not talk about Joe Biden. You were bad. And then Joe Biden's like, hey, wait a second. You put like hundreds of thousands of people in jail. What the fuck is your problem?
Actually, that's one thing to look out for is Joe Biden doing the woke oppo drop on Warren because he's going to mention her work with corporations and bankruptcies, which is very funny.
I'm excited.
For Joe Biden.
I hope he's just
I cannot wait for him to do that.
He's like, hey, maybe I was wrong about credit cards. What about asbestos? Eyes start bleeding.
And then we'll see on MSNBC tomorrow, like, Amy Klobuchar really distinguished herself last night.
Yeah, exactly.
In the
Amy Klobuchar who's going to be the... Oh, yeah, the best part will be Amy Klobuchar's like, I'm from Minnesota, and when I'm not spitting in my staff's face saying, if you ever fucking look at me again, I'll scold F your family. I am finding moderate common sense solutions to move forward. And then MSNBC's like, if there's a breakout from tonight, it was when Amy Klobuchar said she supported TPP because she's pro-worker. I thought that was fascinating. You don't hear that kind of heterodox thinking anymore. All right. Yes. Columbus Mike. What platform is the show going to be streaming tonight during the debate?
Twitch.
That's a good question. We're going to be on Twitch?
Twitching it up.
Check the Twitter for updates.
Let's see. Secret identity politics. I'm reading some of this DKMU literature. I have my doubts, but it's going to get boring liberal Christians to think seriously about what ICE is doing and get them to understand why women get abortions, which, as far as I'm concerned, is the real battle. Having said that, I know how the bridges and gaps either, so good luck to those weirdos. Okay. I have no idea what that means.
That's the cult from earlier.
Oh, okay.
Let's see the work more than the ideas.
Breakfast.
Let's see. Let's see. All right, the final IM of the day. Let's see. Where's
Hello.
Producer Lauren, another reason to not vote for billionaire Tom Steyer, who resigned from the board of the Center for American Progress, then tried to recruit former Think Progress writers to work for his campaign, according to Hill. Didn't another liberal news site shut down after his journalist tried to unionize? It's NYFW, so flash the fash. I don't know I thought that one was something to do with the Ricketts family, though.
Ricketts was DNA info in Gothamist.
All right, folks. We'll see you tonight at the Twitch channel to cover the Democratic debate.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. The months drifted into years, while I shifted in and